no one else who loves me like you used to. Sometimes we're not ourselves, there's no one I can turn to. And I know all the feelings that we shared are in the past. And I know your relationships are never meant to last. And I'll take some time, but I'll be alright. We're moving on, we're moving on. I know times are
The University of Waikato is proud to introduce the world's first Bachelor of Climate Change for the people who know there is no Planet B. Gain the skills needed for the jobs of tomorrow. Contribute to a fundamental shift in the way we do business and go about our lives. Explore how Mātauranga Māori can bring perspective to the most pressing issue of our time. Apply now and carve a career where passion and purpose collide.
Tēnā tātou katoa. Tēnei te mihi atu ki a tātou e hui hui mai nei I runga I te reo karanga o tēnei rā whakahirahira. Nau mai ki te whariwānanga o Waikato. Greetings everybody and thank you for joining us today for this, the special launch of the University of Waikato Bachelor of Climate Change degree. My name is Sarah Jane Tiakiwai. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor Māori at the University of Waikato and I'll be your MC for today's proceedings. We're pleased to officially launch today the world's first Bachelor of Climate Change degree. This degree will deliver graduates who will lead future climate change solutions as New Zealand works to meet its target of net zero emissions by 2050. We had hoped to have had this event in person, but we're equally pleased to be able to share this with you all, albeit virtually. Today we will be hearing from 6 speakers across diverse disciplines and perspectives, and that will be followed by a recorded performance at the end, and we should all be wrapped up by 10:15. Nō reira, tēnei te mihi atu ki a tātou. Let's get on with the program. To begin our event today, our first speaker is Dr. Michael Mann, climate scientist, geophysicist, distinguished professor of atmospheric science at Pennsylvania State University and director of Penn State Earth System Science Center. He was one of 8 lead authors of the Observed Climate Variability and Change chapter of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change Third Scientific Assessment report, which was published in 2001. He has very kindly agreed to share his views on the importance and urgency of climate change for our planet and the actions that need to happen. Please welcome Dr. Michael Mann.
Dear students and faculty and members of the Waikato University community, it is an honor to speak to you today about the defining challenge of our time, a challenge I have devoted my life to addressing and communicating. Even in these times of the COVID-19 pandemic, it is climate change that remains the greatest crisis we face as a civilization, threatening the very health of our planet and the stability of our entire civilization. A year and a half ago, I was on sabbatical in Australia. I had also hoped to make it to New Zealand and to the University of Waikato, but the COVID-19 travel restrictions got in my way. Now, while I have studied climate change for decades now, it was my trip down under, it was my experiences down under during what has come to be known as the Black Summer, where I first came face to face with it. I witnessed an austral summer of unprecedented heat and drought, a toxic mix that spawned the unprecedented bushfires that turned the continent of Australia into a raging inferno, an inferno I witnessed with my own 2 eyes as it destroyed homes, lives, livelihoods, communities, ancient forests, irreplaceable ecosystems and animal species. The Waikato region, meanwhile, was suffering from a devastating drought. And this year, we have had our own Black Summer here in the Northern Hemisphere with, once again, an unprecedented array of heat waves, droughts, wildfires, and floods raging across the United States and Canada and Europe and Asia. The recently released report of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or IPCC, connects the dots in a way that previous reports have not. The IPCC concludes in no uncertain terms now that these unprecedented extreme weather disasters we see playing out would simply not be happening if not for the elevation of carbon pollution in the atmosphere from human activity, primarily fossil fuel burning. When it comes to New Zealand, the report concludes that the drought and fires will get worse in the north, and the heavy rainfall and flooding worsen the south. As The Guardian put it, New Zealand will become a land divided by weather extremes. Rain will batter the west and south, leading to floods, while high temperatures will bring drought and fires to the east and north. So what can we do about it? Well, that's the topic of my recent book, The New Climate War, where I argue that there is urgency, but there's also agency. There's still time to prevent the worst impacts of climate change if we act immediately and boldly. But we must recognize the obstacles that we face today, for they are new ones. As denial vanishes in the presence of overwhelming evidence, we encounter other tactics from polluters looking to forestall the necessary transition from fossil fuels toward clean green energy. Delay, distraction, deflection, division, and doom-mongering. If they can get us to think it's too late to do anything about it, it potentially leads us down that same path of disengagement as outright denial. We have to recognize these tactics and push back against them. That means speaking truth to power and calling out false promises and false solutions from politicians who want to talk the talk without walking the walk. Prevailing in this battle requires an engaged citizenry, and it requires that academia be a leader rather than a follower when it comes to the climate crisis, drawing together all we have to offer in the way of science, the social sciences, the humanities, and ethics. The climate crisis is the defining challenge of our time, and it demands a truly interdisciplinary approach to education and engagement. That's why I'm excited about the new climate change degree program here at the University of Waikato, which embraces just such an approach to education. You'll be hearing more from me in the weeks ahead, but in the meantime, I want to thank the University of Waikato for leading on this issue and to congratulate them on this important and exciting new program. I look forward to us continuing the conversation.
Tēnei te mihi atu ki a koe, Dr. Mann, for that thought-provoking introduction. Our next speaker firmly believes that New Zealand can be an example to the world in transitioning to a high-value, clean-tech, post-carbon economy that works for everyone. After completing a Master's in Sustainable Development and Business Leadership in the UK, he moved back to New Zealand and became co-leader of the Green Party in 2015. Now New Zealand's Minister for Climate Change, please welcome the Honourable James Shaw.
Wa tēnā koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou, and good morning. First of all, I want to thank Dr. Sarah Jane Tiaki-Wai for her introduction and for her leadership role that she's playing at the university, particularly in regard to this degree. And I want to acknowledge the previous speaker, Dr. Michael Mann, who is currently causing waves around the world with his new book, The New Climate War. And I think it's terrific that you managed to get him to contribute this morning as well. And of course, I want to acknowledge the University of Waikato because this is ostensibly the world's first Bachelor of Climate Change. And we're going to need a lot more of those, not just here in Aotearoa, but all around the world in the years to come. I think it is a really important role that the university is playing here in putting this degree together because we know that we have an enormous transition ahead of us and we are really only at the very beginning of that journey now here in Aotearoa. One of the things I really want to pick up on about this degree is its cross-disciplinary nature, and that is critically important because, of course, climate change is not just a scientific challenge, but it is also a challenge of society and economics. And every part of our society and our whole economy is going to face the consequences of the effects of climate change and have to play a role in preventing it getting any worse over the years to come. So a lot of people say that we need to teach more climate science in our schools, and I would say that that is true. But also when we think about the future that we're stepping into, not only are we going to need more scientists, but we're going to need engineers and architects, we're going to need teachers and community builders, we're going to need artists and writers, and of course politicians who understand the interconnected nature of climate change and our responses to it. One of the things I think is critical about this degree is the fact that it brings in a very strong Māori and Pacifica dimension. And I think that that is a role that we can play here in Aotearoa for the rest of the world, because there is a growing understanding and an appreciation for the role that Indigenous peoples have in the transition over the course of the coming decades. Aotearoa has played some role in helping to spread that, and I think having a degree that really highlights and foregrounds Māori and Pacifica views of not just the nature of the challenge, but the solutions to it as well, is really exciting. There is a practical component to this. I understand that there's an action research dimension to the degree in which in your final year you're going to be working with a local iwi or a business or a community group on some aspect of the transition. And Dr. Sarah Jane Tiaki-Wai mentioned that I did my own postgrad degree at Bath University in sustainability and business leadership about 15 years ago. And it was an action research program, which of course, comes with its own challenges. In sort of traditional academia, of course, a lot of what you do is you take the work of people who have gone before you, you digest it, you synthesize it, you look for new insights, and you relay those insights to the world. With action research, you have to go a step further. You have to take your insights and apply them in practice to some dimension of the world around you. And then you need to write up your experiments essentially, and to say, well, how did we do in applying those insights and those concepts in practice, and what are the implications of that that we can take to the rest of the world? I have to say that is a much more challenging proposition than it sounds, and I'm very excited for all of the people who are going to be participating in this degree over the coming years to have that aspect to it, because it is really where the rubber hits the road, to take academic work and to make it practical in the real world. And ultimately, the climate change challenge is an intensely practical one, where we are going to have to look at everything we do in our homes, in our workplaces, on our marae, in our community groups, in our sports clubs, and so on. And so I'm tremendously excited that that is part of this degree as well. Look, it's been said before that this is the last possible moment for us to fix climate change and to prevent a climate catastrophe before the window of opportunity to do so closes forever. And so I have to say that this degree and those of you who are going to be participating in it from next year onwards have arrived at not a moment too soon, but as Dr. Michael Mann said immediately before me, also not too late. There is still a window of opportunity, one that is closing fast, where we can, if we take bold and radical action, significantly transform the way that we work, the goods and the services that we produce, the way that we live, how we get around, what we eat, and so on. And all of that will create a world in which we manage to stave off the threat of climate catastrophe, but also to create a society and economy that is fairer, more equitable, more productive, and more valuable than the one that we have at the moment. So it is a tremendously exciting time, and I am very excited for the people who are going to be participating in the degree, and very keen to hear about the careers that you go on to afterwards. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa.
Ngā mihi nui ki a koe, Minister Shaw. Thank you for your support and for your time here with us today. Next up, we have Waikato University alumna and climate change editor for Stuff, Eloise Gibson. With more than a decade's reporting experience, Eloise has written about business, science and environmental issues for New Zealand media outlets and contributed freelance for BBC Earth, BBC Future and Bloomberg Business Week. She travelled to New York on a Fulbright scholarship to get her master's in science journalism, and her reporting on methane and agriculture led to a UC Berkeley Food and Farming Fellowship. Please join me in welcoming Eloise Gibson.
Kia ora koutou, I'm Eloise Gibson, the Climate Change Editor at Stuff. I'm standing here feeling a bit jealous of you all today, not only because I'm in level 4 and you're in level 3, but because the Bachelor of Climate Change didn't exist when I was at Waikato University about 20 years ago. If it had existed, I think I would have wanted to do it. So congratulations on what you're starting and on the opportunities that you're creating for students there. Look, I've been writing about climate change for about 10 years now, and I can tell you that New Zealand society has really changed, both in its understanding of climate change and in its willingness to change, to do something about it. So you're coming into the job market at the perfect time. Climate journalists used to say that it was too difficult to write about climate change, or that it was a hard thing to get across to our readers because the effects were invisible and they were a long way away. But that's no longer true. We see the impacts happening all around us right now, and I think that increasingly people are beginning to see that this is not a problem for the distant future. We now live in a society where scientists can put a dollar figure in the millions on the added impact that climate change is tacking on to severe floods or severe droughts. We can calculate the proportion of extra water that's coming down a river because of climate change, and unfortunately in the future scientists are probably going to be counting those costs in terms of human lives lost. Once you have that kind of information, it becomes increasingly difficult for companies, governments and local authorities to try and defend the status quo. You are going to be coming out into a job market where the question isn't, is this happening, or how long can I keep polluting before I have to give it up, but who will help me cut my emissions? Who will help me adapt to the changes that are already coming? Rod Carr, the chair of the Climate Change Commission, has called it the biggest economic transition since Rogernomics. So the graduates of this program really are going into the job market of the future. I mentioned I was jealous, but I'm also incredibly excited to see what comes out of this program and to follow what happens to its graduates over the next few years. So I say again, congratulations. I'll be cheering you on from the sidelines, and best of luck with what comes next.
Tēnei te mihi ki a koe, Eloise, and thank you. We are fortunate to have someone of your skill and experience to help in climate change communication. In helping develop the future workforce needed by New Zealand and the world, we are continually consulting with industry stakeholders, ensuring our graduates and the education programs we provide are meeting the needs of industry as future employers. Our next speaker has over 25 years' experience in the financial services sector, largely focused on insurance here in New Zealand, Asia Pacific and the UK. Please welcome Tower Insurance Chief Executive, Blair Turnbull.
Thank you, Sarah Jane. Morena, my name is Blair Turnbull and I'm the CEO for Tower Insurance. The team here at Tower firmly believe that climate change is the single biggest issue that we will face as individuals and also as an industry in our lifetime. And that's why we're such big fans and supporters of the University of Waikato Bachelor of Climate Change. As an insurance industry, climate change affects us more than many other industries. Every single day, we are seeing the incidence of floods, hailstorms, tornadoes on the increase. In fact, if you look at this next chart, which plots climate large events for New Zealand over the past 3 decades, you can see the incidence of flooding, hailstorms, tornadoes, coastal tidal surges increasing dramatically. In fact, there's been recent research from Lloyd's in the UK, the large insurance group, that highlighted that New Zealand, based on large natural perils, is the second riskiest country in the world. You might be wondering, who's number one? It's Bangladesh, not because of earthquakes, but because of flooding in their low-lying areas, which New Zealand also shares in common. Furthermore, if you look at New Zealand over the past year, that really comes to fruition. Over the last year, we've had 9 large events. starting with the Northland floods a year ago. Then we had the Ohawa fires, where at Christmas time we had floods in central Otago, hailstorms in Motueka, and more recently we've had floods in Canterbury, Westland, Nelson, the tornado in Papatoetoe, and just last weekend in West Auckland and Kumeu. And this is telling a very clear story that Mother Nature is not happy and that we need to respond and support climate change better. If we take a step back on this next slide and look at it from an industry in terms of the financial impact it is having on insurance, it is very pronounced. Over the last 30 years, there's been an 800 times increase in the cumulative losses from climate change large events. And as an industry, we are now struggling to cope with that, and we need to respond. We're responding, I believe, in two ways. On this next slide, it highlights that as Tower, and we do this every day, we are responding using data and also changing our product sets. Where 10, 20 years ago, the popular degrees at universities for insurance was around actuarial and accounting and the like, today that is changing. Data is playing such a big part in how we respond, and again why we're so excited about the University of Waikato Bachelor of Climate Change. This is a great degree to have as we look forward. It's also our response to these climate impacts is around the way that we price and the way that we design products. In the last year, we've designed products for electric vehicles, e-scooters, e-bikes, and it's going to be great to see those continuing. But to enable that, we need bright, smart minds. Minds that I hope will take up this Bachelor of Climate Change. And we are delighted to be supporting the University of Waikato in their endeavours in this area. We will be backing it up with interns, holiday roles, also scholarships. And we'll work through with the University of Waikato in the coming weeks and months to make that happen. So look, in summary, delighted to have the opportunity to present to you today. I wish it was in person, but we're in lockdown here in Auckland. But we do believe here at Tower that we can make a difference. We want to make a difference and that we can change climate change. We're thrilled that the University of Waikato is embarking on this journey, Bachelor of Climate Change. I wish I had that opportunity 20 years ago, but I'm thrilled to be here supporting you now. So all the best, kia kaha.
Tēnā koe Blair, and thank you. An interesting perspective on climate change risks and how we might mitigate and reduce their impact. Our next speaker is Associate Professor Sandy Morrison, Acting Dean for Te Pua Wānanga ki te Ao, the University's Faculty of Māori and Indigenous Studies. Sandy is very involved with the National Science Challenge, the Deep South, Changing with Our Climate, as both a member of the leadership team and Te Kāhui Māori, the Māori Advisory Group. Please welcome Associate Professor Sandy Morrison.
Thanks, Sarah Jane. Kia ora koutou katoa, ngā mihi kia tātou. I'm here to support the launch for the Bachelor of Climate Change degree, a really significant time for us at the University of Waikato, from somebody who not only has research experience in dealing with climate change throughout the Pacific, and namely Kiribati, Tonga and Samoa, but also throughout Asia. I've certainly had considerable time to reflect on this phenomena, and working now in my tribal communities even reinforces the need for such a degree even more deeply than I'd considered before. The really significant things in this particular qualification is its broad base. It encompasses not only the physical sciences, it encompasses the social sciences, and for me in our Māori communities, it encompasses mātauranga Māori. And mātauranga Māori, reflected throughout the qualification, has also an extension into Pacific epistemologies, and they also become a really important part of this qualification. And it's important to see these knowledge systems reflected in the qualification, because it's more than one knowledge system that is needed now to be able to solve these complex problems. We have been saying for the formation of this qualification. He oranga tai ao, he oranga tangata. If the environment is healthy, then we are as people. And I want to reinforce that as well. We're also saying for this qualification, kei oku ringa, tō mātua pōpō. In our hands rest the solutions for tomorrow. So we invite you to come and be part of the solution, to come and be part of the qualification, and if you can't study it, then to be supportive of it. We are so looking forward to producing capable graduates who have the analytical skills, can work across the many cultures, also have grounding in the sciences and the social sciences to produce those graduates for the well-being of our country as well as for the planet. So, nau mai, haere mai, kia ora koutou katoa.
Nei rā te mihi atu ki a koe i te Māreikura Sandy. Māori, Pacific and Indigenous communities' perspectives on climate change are important parts of this degree. Our final speaker today is Professor Margaret Barber, Dean of Te Aka Mātuatua School of Science here at the University of Waikato. Margaret is a plant scientist who has taught and researched the impacts of climate change on forests and crop plants for over 20 years. She is a key member of the team who developed the Bachelor of Climate Change and will tell us about the degree itself. Tēnei te mihi atu ki a koe, Margaret, te amo kapua o Te Aka Mātuatua.
Nā mihi nui, Sarah Jane. Tēnā koutou katoa. E mihi ana ki ngā iwi o Waikato Tainui, ngā iwi manaki I aho. I tipu a ki au I te ko awahawa o manga o taki ki nehi nui Maniapoto-rohi. I'd like to acknowledge and thank our speakers today who have all been so accommodating in making the switch to an online event. Thank you, Minister Shaw, Professor Mann, Ms Gibson, Mr Turnbull, Sandy and Sarah Jane. On behalf of the University, I'd also like to thank Tower Insurance for their support of the new degree through scholarships for students. Much appreciated. And thank you everyone online for joining us today to launch our brand new degree. It's my pleasure and privilege to tell you a little bit about the new Bachelor of Climate Change. A huge number of people across Te Whare Wānanga or Waikato community have contributed to make this possible, and I'd like to thank them for their wonderful mahi and whanaungatanga that have turned a shared vision into a reality. I'd also like to thank the other universities around the country who, through the review process for the degree, really challenged us to sharpen our thinking and in doing so, improve the degree. So today I'd like to share with you 3 key points, namely why we've developed this degree and why now, what students will study within the degree, and what future employers in New Zealand and the world can expect from our graduates of the Bachelor of Climate Change. So first, the why. Ko rangi nui ki runga, ko papatua nuku ki raro, tihei Māori ora. Climate change is the most pressing environmental issue facing humanity. We humans have altered the Earth's biogeochemical cycles to such an extent that we are now in a human-centric geological age. That is, the relative environmental stability of the Holocene is over, and we are in the Anthropocene. If we humans don't act now, we are putting in jeopardy our long-term existence. The latest IPCC report makes it very clear that climate is changing, humans are responsible for almost all of the change, and that we're running out of time to avoid the most devastating impacts. The bushfires in the western US and Australia, sea level rise and storm surge effects on our Pacific Island neighbours, increases in average and extreme temperatures across the globe, all of these point to the devastating impacts of climate change. The science of climate change was settled decades ago, and on the face of it, the solution is simple. We have to stop emitting greenhouse gases and sequester more carbon. But simple doesn't mean easy. These two things, stopping emissions, sequestering carbon, are complicated to actually make happen in the real world because our economies and our social and political systems are so strongly linked to fossil fuels. As a country, New Zealand has committed to zero emissions by 2050 through the Climate Change Response Amendment Act in 2019. But current modelling indicates that New Zealand and the rest of the world actually needs to act with much more urgency than this. We will need to make huge, fundamental changes in the way we organise our economies, our businesses, and go about our lives right now. This is the why now for the degree. So I'm a scientist, and I've known about the issues of climate change my whole career. In fact, much of my research has been about the impacts of climate change on crops and forests. Like many scientists, I've been frustrated by the extremely slow progress society has made. And I've chosen this background today. It's a picture I took while I was in Antarctica a few years ago, just as a reminder that even in the remotest areas of the world, like Antarctica, where humans rarely go, there are impacts of climate change. We are changing the globe. So I returned to New Zealand from Australia in 2019, leaving behind a land literally burning to death at the time. And the bushfires in the 2019-2020 season have been linked to climate change. At that point, I decided to stop mucking around and contribute something tangible. During my discussions with my new colleagues at Waikato University, I realised that actually we all agreed that science alone can't solve the climate emergency. We all need to work together to come up with solutions. We need people with knowledge that reaches across disciplines so that scientists like me can talk to social scientists and talk to economists and artists. We also need people who can see that those most affected by climate change, both humans and non-humans, are not those who cause climate change. And even more importantly, we need people who can think across knowledge systems so that Western anthropocentric philosophies of extraction and exploitation, that is, humans above nature, are challenged by worldviews in which humans are a part of nature. He auranga taiao, he auranga tangata. The well-being of people is dependent on the well-being of the environment. The ability to move across disciplines requires a common knowledge and a shared language of the big, complicated issues of climate change. Having a shared language within a team of people with different expertise will accelerate the development of innovative solutions within businesses, institutions, community groups, and iwi. And this is what the Bachelor of Climate Change will provide: the common knowledge and shared language. So what does the degree look like? Well, if you'll humour me, I'd like to share a diagram that will help explain what students in the Bachelor of Climate Change will study. So, like all university bachelor degrees, in the Bachelor of Climate Change, you'll study 8 papers each of 3 years. There are 8 multidisciplinary papers that form the degree. And these are spread out over the 3 years, and they're indicated here in the grey squares. They form the sort of spine or core of the degree. In the first year, you'll take 4 papers that are focused specifically on climate change. There is a science paper, Introduction to the Science of Climate Change, where you'll gain an understanding of the biophysical processes and impacts of climate change on the environment. There's also a social science paper, where you'll understand climate change from a social science perspective, that is, the impacts and responses of humans and their societies to climate change. We've also got a Arts and Activism in a Changing Environment paper in first year, and this recognises the real importance of the creative arts and their ability to reach hearts and minds of people and really affect change. We think this is an important part of the degree. In first year, you'll also study a paper on Pacific and Māori and Indigenous studies focused on the climate change crisis. So in this paper, you'll gain an understanding of the value and mana of Indigenous worldviews that will allow you to think across knowledge systems and worldviews. In first year, there's also a numeracy paper that will allow you to engage with the data of climate change and really understand and analyse that data. In second year, you'll study climate change impacts and adaptation. And this is a mixture of science, geography, and environmental planning, where you'll really get to understand the impacts, but also the adaptations that we have available to us in our response to climate change. And in second year, you'll also study a second Māori, Pacific and Indigenous paper that looks at the responses of Indigenous communities around the world to climate change, both their impacts and their responses. And then in third year, you'll learn about climate change mitigation within businesses and organisations. And this will be taught by staff from the management school, but also scientists. And you'll work together with students from across the university on authentic climate change issue. And this will be in a group with students from different disciplines. So scientists and economists and geographers and social scientists and artists all working together. The authentic climate change problem will come from a community group or iwi or hapu or a business, government department or council or a Crown Research Institute. And this will allow you to really put in practice the skills and knowledge you've developed during your degree to make a real difference in your community. So you'll have the opportunity to contribute your expertise to complement that of your team members. So students from all these different subjects working together to develop an innovative solution for their host organisation. So you can see there's a strong thread of Māori and Indigenous studies through the degree. There's science through the degree, there's social science through the degree, and there's arts and activism through the degree. There are more papers that you will study in your degree, but these are up to you. So the rest of the papers, you'll study 1 or 2 subjects in depth. So while you'll have this broad understanding of climate change from the core of the degree, you'll also have deep disciplinary expertise in 1 or more subjects that interest you the most. So there are 19 subjects or majors that you can choose from, and these will fill the yellow squares. And just to note that the papers that make up the majors in the Bachelor of Climate Change are exactly the same as the papers that make up the majors in the traditional degrees, like Bachelor of Social Science or Bachelor of Science. Then you can see there's some blank squares here, and in this part of the degree you can choose either a second subject as a double major, and you'll study that in the same depth as your first major, or you can choose a minor, so that has slightly fewer papers than the major, or you could study any papers that interest you from across the university. So you can be as creative as you like in combining subjects. So perhaps you could study climate change from the perspective of ecology and economics, or public relations and chemistry, or environmental planning and strategic management. The choice is yours here. You can mix and match as suits your interests. So as the world's first Bachelor of Climate Change, this is quite a different degree from traditional degrees that focus on a single subject. But climate change is such a different issue that we need all of our very best minds from across all subjects to bring their innovative ideas to the table. So New Zealand and the world will very soon have these graduates. They'll have a thorough understanding of climate change and its impacts on the environment and on people, and they'll be able to think critically and holistically. So they will have expertise in a particular area related to climate change, but they'll also have the ability to engage with cultural competency outside their area of expertise. And they'll have real experience working with an authentic climate change problem in a group across disciplines. So Bachelor of Climate Change graduates will be the integrator of knowledge about climate change and how it affects the business of their employer, whether that's an iwi trust or a company or a government department. Graduates will call themselves things like political scientists with expertise in climate change, or climate change environmental scientists, or climate change public relations experts. These are just a few examples. You can find more about the degree and apply to enrol now in the Bachelor of Climate Change on our website for the first intake next year, 2022. Kei aku ringa taku apopo, kua tā koto te manuka. Finally, to launch the world's first Bachelor of Climate Change, I'd like to introduce a performance of a creative work. You might realise that as a scientist, I've never had the honour of introducing a performance before, and I'm a little bit excited. A scientist introducing art really does reflect the core principles of our transdisciplinary degree. With the switch from an live to an online format for this launch event, the performance has also had to switch online. And so everyone involved has had to work really hard from their homes to make this happen today. So please may I introduce Blue Canoe, Green Islands, performed by Libby Gray and dance students from the University of Waikato, written by Associate Professor Karen Barber, with cinematography and editing from Karen and Oliver Stewart. Nō reira, tēnā koutou katoa.
Here we are in the vast Pacific Ocean, blessed with half the world's water and beauty untold. Te moana nui a kiwa, behold! And here in glorious Aotearoa, our comfortable weather and whenua a safe haven, Papatuanuku, our inspiration. But used to mass exploitation and increasing emissions, are we seeing the real connections? Sea level rise, heat waves and storm surges, the result of our capitalist urges. We watch the agricultural industry saving their ass. Are we acknowledging that gas? Growing hunger for animal protein, a methane-making bovine cuisine? While we sit in SUV traffic jams and complaining, are we missing what is happening? Kiribati drown and Dara will burn. Our elders are dying unless rain returns. We must temper the temperature rises, halt the climate deniers, overcome raging fires. Yet still we persist like mad hatters when the more than human world matters, not those in the West getting fatter. Slow down. Take a minute to breathe and think from Pacific to global solutions. Yes, we agree that climate change is real, and yes, climate change is caused by us humans. So now is the time for action to heal. It is not too late for revolutions. What if we stop burning fossil fuels? End oil drilling and deforestation? What if for our oceans we really care? Grow more trees and plan our relocation? What if we work alongside nature and not stupidly against her? Let's move to zero carbon emissions and bolder ambitions, create fluid communication between island nations and really commit to justice for all of our relations. These scientists have sounded the warning. Now we must act and move beyond warning. Educate young people now. As artists to engage our hearts, as teachers to give us the smarts, as carers and kaitiaki, as managers responsibly, as social scientists for just observations, as engineers for radical innovations, as economists to transform our systems, and as politicians to lead with real wisdom. It's clear negative emissions are a healthier aim, and thus our world may flourish again. He oranga taia, he oranga tangata, ti hei, mauri ora.
Aku mihi kia koe Libby, mo tira whakāturanga a tāhua. Huri no kia tātou e hui hui mai nei I runga I te reo o te kaupapa whakahirihira o tēnei rā. Thank you Libby for that beautiful performance, and what a fitting way to conclude the proceedings today for the launch of our Bachelor of Climate Change degree. For those of you interested in the climate change degree, you'll find more information on the website, along with information around how to apply for the first intake, which begins early next year. Thank you all for joining us today. Kia haumare te noho. Keep safe, keep well wherever you are. Tēnā tātou, tēnā tātou, Tēnā tātou katoa.
The University of Waikato is proud to introduce the world's first Bachelor of Climate Change for the people who know there is no planet B. Gain the skills needed for the jobs of tomorrow. Contribute to a fundamental shift in the way we do business and go about our lives. Explore how Mātauranga Māori can bring perspective to the most pressing issue of our time. Apply now and carve a career where passion and purpose collide.